Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista. It is June 21st, 2026. Welcome to today's Tropical Weather Outlook, and happy Father's Day to all of the fathers out there, and especially if you are a father yourself watching this video, happy Father's Day to you. So I hope all of you guys are enjoying your day today. We're going to talk about the tropics, taking a look at what is happening across the Atlantic and the Pacific. Hint, nothing much, at least in the Atlantic, but as I've been mentioning over the last few days, things might start getting heated in the Pacific pretty soon. Starting off with the National Hurricane Center homepage, again, nothing much expected here in the next 7 days in the Atlantic. In the Pacific, though, we have an area of interest, which was designated yesterday, 20% chance of development right now, and this is generally going to be from a piece of energy that'll emerge into the Eastern Pacific and try to develop here to the west of Mexico, so more than likely will not get near the coastline, but is more than likely a sign, in my opinion, of the Pacific Basin here, especially the Eastern Pacific, probably beginning to gear up for an active stretch, especially as we close out this month and head into the month of July, and things could get pretty active here. Here's a satellite shot of the Atlantic and the Pacific right now. Not much happening in the Eastern Atlantic, which is why I didn't really show the satellite picture, but there are a few tropical waves kind of meandering and making their way through the Atlantic right now. Looks like there's one wave hitting the Western Caribbean here, probably another wave in the Eastern Caribbean, and our tropical waves are pulses of energy that originate from Africa, and they supply the seedlings for tropical cyclones to develop. But obviously, if the atmospheric conditions are not there for these waves to consolidate and actually have a chance at developing, they're not going to develop, or at least they're not going to develop until they find favorable conditions, and in which in a lot of these waves cases, more than likely, they're going to move into the Eastern Pacific here. And the Eastern Pacific right now is also not really the most favorable. But over the next several days here to more than likely the next week, at least one of these waves should be able to move into the Pacific and find enough favorable conditions that we will have to watch for development here very soon. Here's a look at the vorticity right now, and here's another way you could take a look at the tropical waves here, and you could kind of clearly see where they are on the vorticity signature. You could definitely see lots of vorticity over Central America right now. And in the Western Caribbean, definitely associated with one wave. There's also a pocket of energy here in the Western MDR, in the tropical Atlantic. That looks like another wave, and actually quite a bit of decent vorticity here near 30 West. That in itself is probably another wave too, and I've actually had quite a bit in the way of some of these aggressive waves moving off the coast of Africa recently, but once again, conditions not really permitting for development in the Atlantic right now. Obviously, we had Arthur in the northwestern Gulf here about a few days ago, especially this past week. But to be quite honest with you, it literally originated. I do believe part of the energy originated from a tropical wave which traversed the Caribbean, so that kind of proves the point that these tropical waves, even if they don't develop out here in the MDR, sometimes they're just going to keep persisting until they find favorable enough conditions for them to be able to consolidate and turn into tropical cyclones, even though Arthur was a very weak storm and also didn't really deal with too favorable and optimal conditions as well. But it kind of was a wave that kind of went through the Caribbean here into the Bay of Campeche and then meandered for a while just onshore of Mexico before finally moving back out over the northwestern Gulf, and we had a named storm. But beyond that, things are looking very quiet right now, and also not much happening in the Eastern Pacific just yet. And one of the main reasons why, as I've said, atmospheric conditions definitely not permitting for development in the Atlantic right now. And that's because we have a lot of wind shear. I mean, just look at this, all throughout the entire deep tropics, stretching from the Western Caribbean eastward all the way into the Eastern MDR. Shear is high. We have a lot of these yellows and reds, and especially quite a bit of these reds here through the Caribbean. Some wind shear values as high as 40 knots, and you cannot have strong wind shear for tropical development. You just can't. That is probably the number one unfavorable factor for tropical cyclone development is high wind shear, because you need the thunderstorms in a developing tropical systems. You need thunderstorms to rise and to stack up so that they could consolidate with each other and allow for development. And wind shear kind of blows thunderstorms across, and distorts them and does not allow them to consolidate properly in order to get tropical development. So lots of wind shear right now in the Atlantic, and especially through the deep tropics too. That's also another very important thing as well, and that is going to be a theme that we will more than likely see reoccur quite often throughout the season this year, especially given the fact that we will be dealing with El Nino, which should frequently cause upper level westerlies across the Atlantic, especially across the tropics, which will mean lots of strong wind shear, and that'll probably be one of the main reasons why the Atlantic will be kept at bay and more than likely below normal. But even for right now, for June, we still deal with a lot of wind shear typically this time of year. I mean, it's still early on in the hurricane season. The atmosphere is still just getting adjusted to the summer and to hurricane season, but there are a few patches of wind shear in which it is lower here, like near Florida. Also some pockets here throughout the subtropics in the Atlantic, and sometimes we can get quick spin-ups that show up on a dime, and that's how we get development in the Atlantic. And I'm pretty sure we're probably going to get developments like that this year too. But what about the Eastern Pacific? Also dealing with not too favorable wind shear values right now. A little bit lower throughout portions of the tropical Eastern Pacific, although still somewhat on the higher end. You still have more of these yellows here instead of seeing mainly green throughout the tropical Pacific, so things are not really too favorable right now, but they are definitely going to get more favorable here in the next few days, and I'll show you that with the models here in just a moment. But first off, the GFS in the Atlantic, taking it out over the next 7 days, and you can see not much happens here. You don't really see vorticity trying to consolidate in the Atlantic, but you do see in the Eastern Pacific that does happen here. So let's actually really quickly flip over to the Eastern Pacific now, and you can see the model does actually show development here starting within the next week. You see the model right now, the GFS, at least for the 12Z run, looks like it's showing two areas that'll try to develop here. More than likely one of them, the 20% chance AOI that the National Hurricane Center has marked right now. And then maybe there's another area that's trying to develop here a little bit further to the east, closer to Mexico. And then if you take that out at the time, the GFS goes pretty bonkers with both. It clearly has both of these storms becoming hurricanes, and definitely in the very least decent looking storms. So the models are starting to show something within the next week, so more than likely conditions will become favorable here in the Eastern Pacific. And let's actually see how that plays out on the wind shear here compared to now, and you can see definitely a not very favorable upper level pattern. Not a lot of wind shear, not very strong overpowering wind shear across the Eastern Pacific right now, but you definitely don't have a favorable upper level wind flow. You have an upper level anticyclone, but that's very centered far to the north, so I guess it's kind of bringing in a bunch of shear to the basin from the northeasterly direction. So again, conditions not very favorable right now, but then you notice as we get towards the end of the week, and as we get towards the end of the month, which pretty much ends this upcoming week, we definitely start to see a lot of that northeasterly shear subside, and you can see that the upper level pattern kind of shows some outflow channels trying to develop with both of the storms here that the GFS is showing. So we go from a less favorable pattern with the upper level winds here to a more favorable pattern within the next week. And the models are already starting to show something out of that, and the National Hurricane Center is already starting to monitor something. So the Eastern Pacific here, we're going to have to watch as things will more than likely start getting very active here very soon. Meanwhile, of course, the Atlantic will be kept quiet more than likely. But if we take a look at climatology here, taking a look at the tropical points of origin for the last 10 days of June for both the Atlantic and the Pacific, from June 21st to June 30th. As you can see, in the tropical Atlantic in general, things are still more than likely quiet right now. In the Atlantic, we occasionally have development in the eastern Atlantic in the MDR here, but that typically only happens in active years, in years where conditions are generally more favorable than what is being expected for this year. And of course, typically in June still, we mainly watch the Western Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Gulf, and the Southeast for tropical development. But in the Eastern Pacific, on the other hand, you can see that we start seeing a lot more points of origin here, and things definitely beginning to ramp up in the Eastern Pacific. So it looks like climatology is on our side, that the Eastern Pacific will start to become much more active. And taking a look at the climatology for activity specifically in the Atlantic, once again, late June, we are only at the very, very starting point of the graph here, and we still have a long way to go before we really see activity ramp up, especially once we get towards late August. So we still really have 2 months before we're really going to start seeing any significant activity in large numbers in the Atlantic. But obviously, even that, especially this year, still we will more than likely see slightly less of it, as we will have El Nino in place. But still a long hurricane season to go. And, the fact that things are quiet right now, obviously we have El Nino as a factor, but also climatology as well. Things are still really quiet. So not much going on in the Atlantic just yet. Sea surface temperature wise, though, seeing how things are right now, and sea surface temperatures, at least in the typical climatologically favored areas, are not bad, especially here in the Bahamas. That stands out to me quite a bit. 29, 30s, maybe even a couple of 31 degrees Celsius readings just off the southeast coast of Florida and in the Bahamas, and throughout the entire Gulf, 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, and no matter what, virtually at all times of the season, except as we get towards very later on, the Gulf of Mexico or America, whichever one you want to call, will always be favorable for tropical development, but not just tropical development, really major hurricane development. And already the sea surface temperatures are warm enough for that in June, and it's only going to get warmer from here on out. Now, of course, that doesn't guarantee that we're going to have a major hurricane, that, anything that touches the waters here will become a major hurricane. It's not a guaranteed. Obviously, we need all of the atmospheric conditions to be favorable, but sea surface temperature wise, things are more than warm enough. And stretching throughout the Caribbean as well, but still not warm enough in the Eastern Atlantic just yet. And some of that has to do with the fact that the Atlantic is also generally on the cooler side this year, but also typically things are not that warm yet in the Eastern Atlantic, which is again why we really don't see development out here all that much early on. In the Eastern Pacific, on the other hand, things are very, very warm this year. They are piping hot, especially as El Nino continues to build along the equator, but throughout the tropical Pacific as well, very, very warm off the coast of Mexico. Consistent 30, 31 degrees Celsius anomaly readings. This is going to be interesting to watch, especially as, once again, this is probably going to continue to build throughout the season, and I'd say we're especially going to have to watch this area here near Mexico once we get towards the late season. In the Pacific here, that'll definitely be very interesting to see, especially if we're able to get one of those, typical powerhouse late season storms that we sometimes see in the Eastern Pacific here. But even all of this warm water stretching all the way up northward into the, peninsula here, and the kind of like the Gulf or the Bay or whatever, stretching up pretty much all the way up along the Mexican coastline. So lots of warm water here in the Eastern Pacific, and certainly something we're going to have to watch, and certainly something that'll definitely as well help fuel an active season for them. And then finally, to close off, we also have tropical cyclone heat potential, which is taking a look at how much warmth and energy is in the ocean below the surface. And we especially like to look at this graph to see areas in which there's enough heat for maybe where we might see some rapid intensification. or I mean, that's how I typically look at the graph. I really like to look at it, especially to see if a tropical system is moving through an area where there's a lot of energy that that system could potentially fuel off of, and again, maybe we might get some rapid intensification. And obviously, throughout the Caribbean, lots of tropical cyclone heat potential, or upper ocean heat content. That's the other word we like to use. And the Caribbean in general has a lot of upper ocean heat content because it is the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean, so it tends to store the most amount of heat energy in the ocean, but also stretching up into the Gulf as well, and kind of have this interesting, blip here where it rises and then it goes back down. That's a part of the loop current, which is connected to the Gulf Stream. So this is something that we'll have to watch as well. And sometimes, in very infamous cases, do storms cross the loop current here in the Gulf and explode. And we've had multiple very, very famous hurricanes in history which have done that. But obviously, we'll see whether or not that happens this year. And then finally, in the Eastern Pacific, lots of upper ocean heat content, especially throughout the entire tropical Pacific. Obviously, especially stretching down into the equator here as El Nino continues to build. But also quite a bit of upper ocean heat content stretching all the way up to the Mexican coastline here. In fact, the values peak as they get towards the Mexican coastline. So that is something that is very curious, and we will have to watch very closely, especially as we get towards later on in the season. And then clearly there's enough warm water here too, stretching all the way northward along the Mexican coastline, that we even have some upper ocean heat content, just to the west, just to the east here of the Baja Peninsula. So that is very interesting as well. And it's probably all going to come into use, especially as the Pacific gets more active here in the next several days, and definitely the coming weeks. But the Atlantic for now, the tropics are still remaining quiet, and they probably will stay quiet for the next foreseeable future. We're still early on in the season, but eventually something is going to happen. Something will happen. And of course, we will be watching it when it does arise. That's going to do it for today's Tropic Weather Outlook, though. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, comment any thoughts you have or questions below. I'll definitely try to answer them. And subscribe to the channel if you want daily tropical updates. Yeah, we're going to be doing these videos on a daily basis, and I have been doing it so far ever since mid-May, since the Pacific hurricane season has started, and we're going to continue these pretty much all the way till the end of hurricane season in November. So if you like that idea, make sure to stay tuned. And by doing that, if you want to stay tuned, please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy the rest of your Father's Day, and spend some time with your father, and kind of just let the day play out and have some fun. And I once again will talk to all of you guys tomorrow.